Hello and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Steve Thatcher, Customer Solutions Manager at A-Link Consulting, and we are so thrilled to have you here for today's session, today's discussion on what's new in Tableau, all about leveraging the power of Tableau dashboards in higher education and understanding all the latest features and innovations that Tableau has to offer. First, just a little bit about us. As I said, my name is Steve Thatcher. Our focus is and always has been on helping higher education institutions use their own data to gain actionable insight into their students, programs, and staff. And we do this by leveraging our 20 years of combined experience at the company to deliver custom development and training services in the areas of reporting, analytics, SQL, data warehousing, and of course, dashboards. We are very passionate about helping institutions prepare and present their information. So translating raw data into insights and action, or in other words, simplifying the complex. Now, when it comes to simplifying complex data, there's often no better solution than a good dashboard, which brings us to today's topic. So I hope everyone's able to log in for today's live session. This will be recorded. For those, we have a chat session or a chat box and a question box in the GoToWebinar panel, so you can use that to communicate with me. If you have any questions, if it's hard to hear the audio, etc., just let me know in there, and I'll do my best to monitor that as I go through all of our examples today. I'll try to leave some time at the end for a question and answer session as well. So today, specifically, we'll be discussing several of the latest Tableau dashboard and data design features and enhancements included in Tableau 2020. .1 through .4. Now, .5 is out, but we believe that we have the most important data or Tableau dashboard design concepts in today's session. So specifically, we'll be looking at Tableau's new relationship data model, and how it differs from the traditional table joined workflow. We'll be looking at adding animations to your visualizations. We'll take a look at the latest enhancements to dashboard parameters, exploring the new in operator and adding block comments to calculated fields, exciting new enhancements to calculations, and seeing how set controls can enhance the dashboard interactivity experience, discussing many enhancements to maps and spatial analysis. We'll take a look at the new exporting options to PDF, PowerPoint, and images. And finally, we'll take a look at enhancements to Tableau's predictive modeling and advanced analytics engine. So quite the packed agenda today. Again, I'll try to leave some time at the end for questions and answers. If not, we can definitely follow up with you via email and post webinar. So we'll be using a few of our internal data sources to illustrate these new features. In fact, here in a moment, I'll get out of PowerPoint and into Tableau, and we'll let that drive for the webinar. We'll drive out of Tableau. And I just want to point out that our West Coast College data set contains the usual student and course enrollment information found in higher education institutions. And our West Coast Air data source will provide a set of airport geographic data to help us illustrate some of the new enhancements to maps and spatial analysis concepts. And we'll actually use the world indicators data source included in Tableau Desktop. So we'll use that for our predictive analytics session. So let's first take a look at our relationships data model. And to illustrate this, we'll go ahead and get out of PowerPoint. And we'll move straight into Tableau. This is Tableau 2020.4 that I'm using for the entire webinar. Okay, so the new relationship model. To illustrate this, we'll build a data source from our West Coast College database. So again, data regarding students, enrollments, degrees earned, as well as other student-related data such as financial aid, etc. So let's look at bringing in student demographic information by dragging a person table into our data source. Okay, so I have a connection into a SQL Server database, pretty standard from here. Things look maybe a little bit different graphics wise, but we'll see here in a moment some of the new changes. So if I drag the person table in, that works as planned. Maybe it looks a little bit different than a table does in the prior versions, but we drag it onto the canvas. Now we'll also focus on student enrollment information by dragging in the enrollments table. Okay. Now notice the new table connector. It's referred to as a noodle. However, this is now the default connector. So it's a relationship versus the traditional table join, right? And we can see in here that instead of a join, it is setting up a relationship. It says, okay, we see the person table, we see the enrollments table, we see all of the, oops, see, I think we had a question there. We see all of the, okay. We have, I'm so sorry, I'm going to interrupt this real quick. We have somebody that says they cannot hear. It says the computer's not on mute. I should not be muted. Can anybody else have a problem hearing me? Okay, so other people can hear. So if you can't, well, I guess if you can't hear, I'll just type in here. You can probably see others. My audio is, I'm going to type a message here real quick to the audience. My audio is unmuted and others can't hear my audio. Okay, hopefully, I know they can't hear me, but hopefully they can see that and check and see if it's an audio on their end. If not, the recording will be provided. So if you hear anybody, if you know of anybody that can't hear, just mention that we will have the recording afterwards. Okay. Okay, great. Perfect. Okay, looks like they can hear now. They had to change around some settings. Okay, so back to relationships. Thank you. So we are looking at all of the records from the person table and all of the records from the enrollments tables. And we just have a relationship here now that we can further define. And in this case, they guessed right that person ID is related to person ID. So now we can bring all these records in and into our workbook, and we can drag and drop and use them in the visualization, and they would be related. The difference is that, like I said, we're bringing in all the records and not doing any sort of join filtering at this point in our workbook. So we have that option by default to just create a relationship. Okay, so in fact, if we click down here, we see the first indication. The noodle is the first change that we can double click on and work with. But if we now look here at the bottom, it's another difference between our new relationship model and the table join workflow. If we click on a table, we will see just that table in the data set in the panel in the pane below. So we no longer see a combined data set of all the columns and just those records per the join that we have on our tables. We see all of the tables and therefore all of the records for the person table. We click on the enrollments table, we see all of the columns and all of the records from the enrollments table. We don't see that combined data set, but rest assured, we can still get to the traditional table join if you do have, in fact, tables that are extremely large. You would never want to bring every record into the workbook. You do want to restrict that. You can still do that, and we'll see that here in a moment. We can restrict that here at the query level. Now we have the option, so it's more flexible relationship in that since we're bringing all the records in, we can further restrict that data down and do calculations to pull just those records for enrollments, for example, just the person records for those who have enrolled. We can do that at the dashboard level if we want to use a relationship. Okay, so let's look at how to add a traditional table join. So this is a relationship, and again, all the records from each of the tables. I'm going to move to another connection that I have here, and I'm going to demonstrate how to do a join. A traditional table join is what I refer to it here in this session. So now we'll start the same way, right? We have a connection back to the same database, West Coast College, and we're going to drag person table onto the canvas, and that's great. But instead of staying in the default relationships pane, I'm going to go ahead and double click on my person table. That opens up this box. And this box is where we can do our traditional table join. We now see the color coding on the person table. And if we drag the enrollments table in, right, we can see here that we have two tables that are now joined. And I'll leave this as an inner join. That works fine for my demonstration, but we can still double click and get to our other joins and define our joins further between these two tables. And again, the difference is now we're going to restrict, in this case, an inner join. Now my workbook will only contain through this connection just those person records where there's an enrollment. So just those people that are enrolled. If you were using degrees and certificates, you would show just those people from your institution that have graduated. You would not have your faculty, anybody else who's currently enrolled but does not have a degree or certificate, et cetera, right? You're no longer filtering, you would be filtering just those records out and have just these smaller data sets. So you have the option of doing both now with the relationship data model. We can continue working on like we normally do. We can add, calculated fields. So I'm just going to create a calculated field for person. So I'm going to call this count distinct person. And we'll refer to these in some of the later examples. And we're just going to count and we'll do a count of enrollments. Okay, so I'm just going to add those now to our data set, and then we can update. Okay, now some of you may be wondering at this point, okay, that's great for new workbooks, but what do we do with our existing workbooks created in prior versions? Can we still see, can we still work with existing table joins that were created, say, in 2019.x with the new 2020.4? Yes, you can. So what we'll do is we'll open the college profile dashboard. This was created in a prior version. And what's going to happen is we're going to see a new box in our data source. So we're just using this dashboard to get to the data source, and we're going to see this migrated data. Those of you who are using the new 2020.4 wondering what this is basically the shell that we just created in our join in our other dashboard. Our join connection, we can now open this table and get back to what we created in prior versions. So the important thing there is that it does not break, the new relationship model does not break any prior dashboards, but we will say that an important note is for those of you who are using Tableau Server, right? If you upload 2020 workbooks, so those created in 2020.4 to prior versions of Tableau Server, so if your server hasn't been upgraded from say 2019 to 2020, and you use this new relationship model or the calculations that we'll talk about later, some of the new features, it'll cause the uploaded dashboards, so your 2020.4 desktop dashboard uploaded to the 2019 prior version server, we'll display those visualizations using those features with blank data. So they'll just show blank. They'll upload, they'll just show blank. So if your organization has not upgraded the Tableau server to the latest version, then workbooks should continue to be developed using the traditional table join workflow. You can still use 2020.4, but in this case, you'll use the traditional table join, which we've demonstrated you can still do, and not use the relationships model. Okay, so let's return to our original dashboard to see how we can now add animations to our visualizations. Okay, so let's add a dashboard. Let's add a worksheet. We'll name this enrollment trend. Okay, and now on here, we're going to display a chart. We're going to display some filters, and we're going to take a look at how fast things update and look at ways now that we can actually change the speed that things are updated on the chart. So to demonstrate this, let's place a month of registration. So I'll take our registration date, and I'll just go ahead and go out. Actually, you know what? I just want the month. So, okay, now after a month of registration, let's put the count distinct person. On the rows, and we'll put that on the text or the label. Okay, straightforward line. We'll add a couple filters so that we can actually change the visualization and take a look at those updating speeds. So let's add a gender and a year of registration date as filters. So we'll take our gender. We'll just go ahead and use all here. And we'll take our year of registration. So again, just dashboarding 101, kind of building a viz, columns, rows, gender, etc. We have our list. Now we're going to show our filters just so that we can interact with them. And we can do so over here. We can drag these, underneath wherever we want. So we can now interact with our filters. So let's go ahead and do just that. Let's go ahead and change the years. Let's change it to 16, 17, 18. And as you can see, the default method or the default change speed is instantaneous. Our charts are updating, or this chart is updating instantaneously as I interact with my filters. Same thing with gender, right? The speed is a fraction of a second, instantaneous, and that's what we would expect. But we now have the ability to change that. So if we want to provide another look and feel to our dashboard, we can edit that change. Now, let's add a new animation type to the chart transition. So from the Format menu, we have an Animations selection. Okay, and we can see that we can set animations at the workbook level or on a particular selected sheet. Okay, so we'll go ahead and do it for a sheet. We'll turn those on, and we will turn it on here, and we'll see that our duration can now be selected, and the default, what we're seeing here, that they label as fast, is 0.30 of a second, right? 1/2 a second, or half second is medium, and then finally 1 second is slow. So we'll go ahead and set it to slow. Okay, and now that we've changed that duration, okay, we can see now it slows down just a little bit. It's not happening as quickly, right? And so if you have multiple lines on here, multiple charts, you can kind of change. If there's a drastic change between those lines or bars or et cetera, you can kind of see that change happen in more of a time-elapsed fashion, right? So we're actually almost doubling the speed at which, or slowing down the rate of speed that these visualizations are now updating. So that works for all of your filters here. So again, we've added an animation to the worksheet to kind of control that. Now, if you look this up out in the wild, a lot of great examples on this, and one thing that is kind of a recurring theme that I saw to demonstrate this would be some sort of race, so you want to show cities racing or subjects racing or something against each other, like a competitive race of data. We had multiple lines to see how they grow over time. So I kind of have something like that in our animation race dashboard. So let me open that up real quick. So I've just pre-assembled this quick demonstration just to kind of show you kind of what they're doing. Now, in this case, I probably should filter out San Francisco and show more of a competition, but below San Francisco, we can see we have a ranking here, 1 through 20. We can kind of see the cities based on whatever we're doing here, enrollment rank, count of enrollments, et cetera. Over time, how have these cities changed in terms of ranking, right? So if we display it visually here, I'm going to go ahead and maximize this just in case you guys can't see it as well. We can see the cities here ranked. And so now with the addition of a play button and animations, we can see something like this. So we'll work through every instance of the year, and by slowing down the changes, we can kind of see this nice little variation in the changes, kind of follow that race. And over time, to see if some take over other cities, as you see here, Menlo Park is going up and down based on the enrollments for the particular year. So just another fun way, interactive way to show changes in our data. Those would be your animations. Okay, so let's return back to our line chart in our original dashboard, and we'll talk about our next topic, which will be dynamic parameters. Okay, so we'll create a parameter that allows us to choose a range of registration dates for our line chart. So creating a parameter is similar to earlier versions, nothing new in creating the parameter, just some of the new features for parameters that have been added to 2020.4. Let's right click on registration date and choose create parameter. We'll name it start date. And we can choose the data type. So we'll select date and time. We'll allow a range of values. And it's in the resulting range of values section that we see the latest parameter enhancement, right? We can now further refine our min and max values by setting those values to a fixed set of a data field's values or update when the data source is refreshed. So we can now, and we can hard code them here, or we can reach out into our different data sources and pick a particular object to fill out what the minimum and the maximum values are. So that can always be set and automated for us. So let's fix the start date parameter to the current minimum and maximum values from the registration date field in our join data. So we're on fixed, our join data, and we'll go to our registration date. So it looks in there because we have the date and time set. It looks in and looks at the date and time objects from the source and lets us pick, in this case, the registration date. Okay, we'll now create a similar end date parameter and set that current value to the maximum value that we list in range of value, just to get an end date parameter. But we can see here now we have the ability of fixing and refreshing or setting minimum max date. So more refinement around date and time, for example, parameters. Okay, so we have our range, display format current. All right, so we'll click OK. We'll create another parameter. And again, this end date, date and time. We'll go to our range. Okay, and let's see, we'll set the parameter to the current value and set the maximum value list on the range of values. So current maximum there. Okay, so we'll set that out to the registration date as well and click OK. And now we'll create one more. Now that we've created our parameters, they're not, as we know from parameters, they're not connected automatically to our visualization. They won't change anything. We can interact with them, but they don't do anything until we connect them via a calculated field. So we'll create a registration date or date range calculated field. So let's go ahead and do that. And then we'll be able to see and work with our things. Okay, call this date range. And we'll create the following formula that will reference our new parameters. Okay, so if our range date, if our registration date is greater than or equal to our start date, and registration date is less than or equal to our end date. We've already fixed those dates. We'll now show our parameters. And for our parameters, we'll just go ahead and drag these maybe underneath here. We don't need to, but we'll just do that for this demonstration, and then we'll just interact. Oh, yep, and then we need to add that. Sorry, we created the measures. Okay, we need our date range. Oh, I created it as a parameter, didn't I? Nothing like live demonstration. There we go, date range, and we want that to be true. Now we're connected. Okay, right, so we will just create our date ranges, and now we have the ability to fix those, and these dates are not playing nice for me. Oh, because I have the start and end date. There we go. Probably makes more sense to put those there. Okay, so my minor missteps aside there, we created two parameters. We saw that we had the ability now to fix the start and end dates. That's what's new with the parameters. And for our demonstrations, we had two parameters. We created a date range filter, true or false, set that in the filters pane per parameters. Now our parameters are connected to our visualizations. We just simply showed our parameters at that point, and now we have populated dates based on a measure or a field in our data source. And that is what's new with our parameters. Okay. We can create one more calculation, and we'll highlight a couple new features for calculations in Tableau 2020.4. So moving on from our parameters and into calculations, we'll take a look at two new functions, right? It'll be mainly actually one new function, the in function, and then the ability to add comments, block comments to our calculations for descriptions, etc. So let's create a new worksheet named calculations. From our join data source, which we're on now, we'll place final grade dimension on the rows shell. So we'll see our final grades, and we'll create a field, a calculated field using the new in function to display pass for grades A, B, and C, and fail otherwise. So A, B, and C pass, anything else DFW. For this demonstration, we'll call fail. Sometimes we can handle withdrawals differently, but we'll put a note in there to let everyone know that what we're including or excluding. So we'll create this new. For me, I just create calculated fields on anything. I just create it, and then I just take that out. So if you're wondering why I'm selecting birthday, that's just why. We're going to call this. Okay, let's open. Okay. Pass fail. And the formula is not going to look revolutionary if you've been using multiple products and different calculation engines. Nothing crazy going on over here. If final grade in A, B, C, then pass, else fail. So if we've been using if-thens and in-list statements in SQL or other products, nothing revolutionary here. For those who have been using Tableau for several versions now, this is huge. It's one of those small things that they made that saves a lot of time. If you think about this, another way we could do this is by doing multiple or statements. If final grade equals A, or final grade equals B, or final grade equals C, then pass, else fail. We used to have to do that prior to the in function. This is what's new. We now have the ability to include our list in a list, right? So nothing revolutionary on the calculation. They didn't create some new way of math, but they brought in a new function called the in function that lets us build lists a lot more efficiently and more intuitively, again, if you're coming off of some of the other calculation engines from other products or from SQL, etc. Okay, so now we have our if final grade in function, and we'll click apply, okay, right? And we'll put that on our row shelf as well. Okay, pass, 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 fail, fail, fail. And if we were doing a definitions page, or for people who want to know what's in the calculation, we can also add a comment, a block comment. So let's go back into our pass fail. And if they're wondering, wow, we're calling W, did they mean to do that? Well, yes, we did, just for this particular analysis. So now, similar to, let's say SQL, in SQL, you can put a slash star, and then a star slash at the end, and in between you can add text for a comment. So we're saying pass fail, not considering course withdrawals. Okay, so, but again, we can put anything that we want in between our brackets here. So we have a slash star and a star slash. Okay, and you'll see now that those comments are grayed out. I say grayed out, but they're in gray font, right? So they're not being assessed. We see their calculation is valid. It's not being considered in calculating the pass, fail, et cetera. It's just simply a comment that we can put in there. So if you're used to doing that in other tools, you now have the ability in 2020.4. As of course, with any new feature, if you're brand new to this version, to Tableau, you're picking up this version, you're getting all of these new features and wondering, why is this guy so excited about an in list? But there it is. It's available to us now. Okay, so again, I will remind you, this is another new feature, the in and the blocks. I haven't tested blocks directly, but those may work. But again, the in function is one that won't be recognized by older versions of Tableau Server. So just like our relationships model, if you build an in list in 2020.4, you can upload the dashboard, but this visualization would be blank because it's using that. So unfortunately, or fortunately for those who have no control over when their server gets upgraded, if you're still waiting on that, if you were to rewrite this or if you were to use this logic, you could still do it. You just can't use the, sorry, wrong one. You just can't use the in function. You would go back to the old way. I'm doing my double quotes there in the air. We go back to the old way where you would say equals or A or equals B or equals C. And again, you're using 2020.4. Instead of the in function in this particular example, I'd write it with multiple or statements. And then I can say upload the workbook to an older version of Tableau and it would render okay. Right? So new features in Tableau Desktop, if they're not synchronized with the new, if the server's not synchronized, then you have to use the prior version. If you're using 2019, you have to use 2019 compliant features in your workbook. But hopefully those of you, if you're in that situation, it won't be long, server gets upgraded, and then you won't have to worry about that. Okay. And I see somebody excited about that as well out there, so great. Yeah, about the in function. So okay, now let's take a look. Let's move from calculations and take a look at sets. So we'll look at a few improvements to set controls implemented specifically in 2020.2. So if you're already on 20 or in a couple versions, and you might say it's already there. But again, I'm covering kind of 2020 versus 2019. And some of these features that I'm talking about today have been implemented across .1, .2, .3, and then finally .4. Okay, so we're going to talk about sets. One improvement to set controls is the ability to show a set similar to a filter to allow for an easier way to select multiple values. So this is compared to if you worked with sets and you wanted to create certain points on a map and you want to include particular points, not all of them, particular ones in a set, you would use the control click method, hold down the control button and click each, let's say, specific points on the map. And say, I want that one and that one, and you're in the set, and you're in the set, and you're in the set, right? But if it's tedious and if it could be more difficult and tedious, the more denser that visualization is. It's harder to pick out those points with a mouse click, right? So we want ability to select those in some different way. And there's a couple of different ways now that we can add values to a set. So to illustrate this one, we'll do a new worksheet named set. Okay, and we'll use our join data source and we'll add city to the detail card. That's going to turn our viz into a map. Now we see our points on the map, right? Okay, and if we wanted to select these into a set, we can navigate, click here, hold down control and kind of go through and do this number here. So I'm holding down control and selecting particular particular points, and then I can from there include, exclude, do whatever, and put them into a set. okay? But instead of selecting point by point, let's create a set filter for city. So we'll right click on the city field and select create set. Okay. All right, and so we have city set. I'll use all, click OK. Now we see from the icon here on the left that it is a set as opposed to a calculation or a parameter here at the bottom. Sorry if it's super small here. I didn't set up my zoom screen on this particular machine, so I don't want to mess with that now because you know how that goes. Or, dim the lights in the building probably. But at any rate, if you can see this, it's a different thing. It is a set. It has the icon for a set. Now we can add the sets to the marks card or the color card. Okay, no surprise there. We'll just go ahead and add this in here so that we can see, and we'll see later how this set will change as we add values to it. And now we are able to, let's see, show the city set and display it below the marks card. So let's go to the city set. Let's show that. And I'm just going to go ahead and drag this one over here just so we can stay here on the left-hand side. And here is the first big change with sets. We can now show them as filters. Well, they're sets, but work with them as we do with filters. So we had our, our year or month of year of registration and our gender before as filters. We now have a city set, and we can start to click values. And if we see here, and again, maybe I should have zoomed in, we have the blue. The ones I'm selecting now are blue, as if I'm clicking and holding down the control button and clicking with the mouse, right? So I want to put everyone in my set. You're all in the set. Congratulations, right? So I can now select and create sets using the filter-like selection panel. And now another improvement to set controls, and another way we'll show that we can add and remove sets, is we have the ability to add or replace values in the set. Now we can just untick values here if we want to stay here. If we're good on navigation panes and hanging out over here and not interacting directly with the map, we're good. We can just select and add and replace values in our set. But if we still wanted to interact with, let's say, this dot for those times where maybe we don't know the name that we want to add or replace, but we want to be able to click here and say, I want this dot and I want this dot. So for those times when you do want that, but you want to be able to add it at the viz level, not at the panel level, you can do that now. So again, so the sets can be displayed for the user to interact with, but we'll use actions to display the selection in a contextual menu. So we'll take dashboard actions, the new add replace value set feature for sets, and we'll put those together for a new way to add or replace. So let's set this up. So we'll set an example, allows the user to add or remove a set value by interacting with the tooltip that appears when hovering over a map. So we hover over this, right? I want to be able to select it out of this box that I see in the tooltip. So maybe click a hyperlink that says add this one, remove this one, add this one, and remove this one without having to hold down the control button, etc. Okay, we'll stay on the set worksheet and we'll create a new worksheet action. Okay, so again, I went to worksheet actions and I'm going to add a new value down here is change set values. Okay, I'm going to name this plus add values to city set one. Okay, I'm going to do the plus because we're going to visually see that this link will let us plus. We'll set this up as a hyperlink and it'll let us plus or add to the set. Okay, and I'm going to run it on the menu because I want to interact with the tooltip menu. And I want to select city set. That's a set that I want to interact with or add and replace to. And then running the selection, running this action will, that section now contains the ability to add or remove values from a set. So it's a new enhancement. So I want to go ahead and add values. Okay, and we'll go ahead and keep set values on clearing, right? So we don't want to get rid of set values. We just want to add or remove. In this case, we just want to add set values. So we'll go ahead and click OK. And now when I come over to this dot, I can double click, or I can click on it, see what I saw before in the tooltip, but I now have a clever add values to city set one. Okay, so I can add that value by simply clicking on it and it gets added to the set. Now they're all added in there. So let me go ahead and clear that out. And I'll add Atherton by simply adding, and it's now a blue dot, and it's the only blue dot until I come down here and add, right? So now I can hover over and I can select, and you'll notice here that as I interact on the dot, because I have the city set up here, those values are also getting ticked by way of the link, indirectly by interacting with the link. Okay, and we can go on and we can continue to remove. So if we just did another dashboard action or worksheet action. Okay, I'll put this to let's do this one. Let's do city. Sorry about that. Probably would work anyways, but let me make sure. And we will. Yep. Okay, that's good. Yep. We'll go to worksheet, actions, add an action. Okay. Actually, what we'll just do one. We'll just do remove. So we'll change the set values, and then we'll just do the opposite of what we did. We will remove values from city set one. And we'll follow the same methodology. City set, we'll remove. And now we can remove just as easily as we added. Okay, so another way to provide an interactive way to select, add, or remove from a particular set. Now we can get real creative. I don't think we really have the time here. I'm going to move on to some other topics, but we can get creative here and create a value that will work out the colors. If we want to create, now we're on city set one, it's blue. We can add city set two, make that orange. We can also create a value that will show a third color if they're in both sets. So you have the functionality through, or you have the flexibility through formulas to show pretty creative, involved sets. Set one, set two, one's blue, one's orange, and it's maybe yellow if they're included in both. So you can work that out through variables and calculated measures, calculated fields. Okay, so that's on sets. New ways of selecting sets. We see that we can, have new values in actions on what we can do with sets and add and remove via actions, and also through a traditional, panel filter, if you will, a tick box on the panel. So let's now move on to maps and spatial analysis. So it's now possible to layer multiple map marks. So we can have multiple levels, maybe a city, a zip code, and a county, and all formatted and represented, formatted differently, but all represented on the same map, for example. So let's make a duplicate of our set worksheet. Okay, I'm just going to go ahead and turn all these on for now. Okay. Great, so let's duplicate the set. Let's name it map and remove the city set from the color marks card. And let's go ahead and take this off of here. Yeah, we can leave that there, it's gone. Okay, so we're no longer working with sets, we're just gonna work with this geographical data. So we now have city, right? Each point here is a city on my map. Let me see if I can come in. Well, I don't want to take out too much of that. All right. So we have city. So let's go ahead and add zip code as a second layer. So we know we have zip code. It's a geographical dimension here, so we can drag this on. Now, notice as soon as I start to move, I get this add a marks layer box on top of the viz. So I'll go ahead and drop it there. And now I can see my city or my zip appear, but it appears here on the marks card as a separate card. If you click on city, it'll open the city mark. And here we have the zip mark. And the difference is, the advantage here is that we can format these differently. So it's displayed as a separate marks card section from city. So then we can format these. We can now apply separate formatting. So for example, we can change the zip code marks to a map. So we drop down, we change it to map, right? And now our zip codes are displayed separately or differently than our cities, right? So our zip codes are mentioned as our zip codes are as a map, our cities are as the dots, right? And we can change the colors. We can, change city to something else. We can, keep formatting the separate layers, but they're now layered on top of the same map. Okay, if we added county, right? Just kind of drilling home the point here. And let's take county and then add that to our marks layer. And we can make county maybe a density, right? Okay, so now San Mateo County's here. We now have, different zip codes, and then we have our cities represented differently. So again, you would look at this and say, okay, great, I want to have the points be this color and the map be maybe not so many different colors. Just kind of clean and format it, but we can have the formatting for county, zip, and city as separate sections of the mark card. Okay, staying within maps and spatial analysis, we'll talk about there are several spatial functions in addition to make point and make line introduced earlier. These were functions called make point, make line, introduced in earlier versions. A new buffer calculation allows for displaying a visual buffer zone around points on a map. So to illustrate, let's open another dashboard we have here, the map and spatial analysis dashboard. Okay, this dashboard displays graphical data for several US airports. So looking at the points worksheet, we see several airports represented by points on the map here, right? We maximize this. Okay. To illustrate, I'm sorry, we have different points on the map. Well, specifically, these points are calculated using the make point spatial function. So if we come over here, we see that we've created a calculation called make point destination. So we'll just pop that open. So again, this has been around in earlier versions, but these are needed for the buffer point calculation. So we'll show you this here. We're simply making a point for our latitude and longitude per the filters on this report. Okay, so we're using a make point destination here to then create a buffer calculation. So let's add a buffer zone around each point. And we want to determine if any one of these dots are within 100 miles. We can pick miles, inches, different distances. We have variables in the buffer zone, but for this example, we want to see if any one of these are within 100 miles, visually if they're within 100 miles of each other. So let's create a buffer around that. We'll create a new calculated field. We'll call it buffer. And inside the buffer function, we'll define our variables. So we have buffer is the function for our make point destination, which is needed, make line or make point. We want to now look at a certain distance. We have 100, and we are designating, in this case, miles. Again, you can use different units. You can look up in the definition for inches and different ones depending on the type of map you're doing. I'm doing airports, we're going to use miles. So let's create a buffer that's within, shows 100 miles around the point. Okay, and we know we can add new layers. So we're going to add the buffer as a layer, and now we see this. Okay. Now we picked 100, so we can visually see these two are within 100 miles of each other. The other ones look like they are not. We can also create a buffer parameter, and we can, of course, now we're just at the calculation level in Tableau. We can edit this and reference and replace the hard-coded 100 with a parameter that I've already created for buffer that just simply lets you select from 0 to 100. And I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that. And select buffer parameter. Right? And now I can let the user select the miles that they would like to use. Okay, so we're doing this new buffer example on an existing map that's out of the box in Tableau. It's a map background. Specifically, it is the background maps. Light. The light background map, but we have the ability now to add external maps. So we're currently looking at a map background included with Tableau. It's now possible to integrate external sources as a map background. So for example, we can bring in a Mapbox map or a WMS map as a map background. So we're going to add a Mapbox map. Okay, this is an external site that you can go and create custom maps and bring them into your viz. Okay, and I'm going to do this here. Okay, so I'm going to go into backgrounds, and we see now we have options down here for add a Mapbox, WMS, different options here. So we're going to add a Mapbox map. We're going to call this and if you follow the Mapbox MB dark detail, and if you follow the Mapbox workflow for designing the map, at the end of that, it'll say, great, you've created everything. We'll put all those parameters into a URL. You'll then paste this URL into your program. In this case, we'll put it into our new Mapbox MB dark detail, and that definition is URL. We'll paste that in. Oops. Of course not. Okay. There we go. Okay, so now we can see our map here, right? And if we want to make it more interesting, let's go back and show the real detail of it. We'll go back to our original one, right? A lot of colors on here, but we'll do the same thing and really show you some of the details. So we'll go ahead and add this to the background. Oh, we need to add it in here as well. That's fine. We'll just do it again. So again, we add, and we put our URL, click OK. And again, we get our dark detail. Now we're zoomed in to Northern California specifically, and now we can really see some of the enhancements. So we see this dark map, right? And some of the more detail as you zoom in, right? And move around the map. So we have the ability now, if you're using external sites, Mapbox, WMS, you can now bring those in and change the backgrounds on your maps. Okay, I know everyone's on mute, but hopefully there's a lot of oohs, that's great, this is fantastic, right? Okay, so that would be everything now in our maps, right? I know we talked about, okay, we have a few more minutes here, so we have two more topics. I talked about exporting options. Those are pretty straightforward, so I won't go through an in-depth demonstration, but if we go to File and Export as PowerPoint, we have the ability to do that. So I'll just show you PowerPoint real quick. Pretty straightforward. Once you choose the format you want, whether it's PowerPoint or PDF, you then select whatever view you want. So you can say just this view, or you can of course reach into the entire workbook and get every view that's in here, right? So you can select all, you would export somewhere on your desktop, anywhere on your local computer, and then you'd be able to see that on your desktop. Okay, so that's exporting. And then finally, we will move into predictive analytics. So we're going to go back to our original dashboard. Here we are, yep, we're on the map. Okay, we'll create a new worksheet. And from our world indicators data source, right? So again, looks like this was set up in the new relationship model. So we have a business, a development, a health, a population, and these are folders. Just kind of showing you that when you use the new relationship model, you get all of the records in each of the different sections. So the panel looks a little bit different from that source, but we're here to talk about just some of the data from here to demonstrate some of the new things in predictive analytics. So we'll put the year on the column shelf. So let's just set up our data real quick. Okay. And we'll take our population on the row shelf. And we have data through 2012. And what we can do now is we can provide a forecast for future years based on historical data. So to do this, okay, we'll right click. We'll navigate to the analysis, forecast, and show forecast. So we have our viz, we'll simply show our forecast. And we see this little line out here that's in light blue. Okay, this is our forecast line. And we'll see now that we have options to refine that forecast. So we can right click here, go to forecast, and go to our forecast options. And we have a forecast options box that will let us do an automatic exactly until, right? We can pick our source data and do a forecast model, some of our options in here. So if you're doing a lot of statistics, you might find this very helpful to provide a forecast, right? So we will set the length to 7 years, right? So we're gonna go 7 years out into 2018. Now I realize that's past data set's old, but if we want to go into future years, we can do that. We'll ignore 0 years. And we'll change it to an additive trend. Sorry, we'll just leave it. Yeah, custom to an additive trend, an additive season. I'm just picking these just to show you that we have the ability to do a automatic without seasonality, or pick a custom of none, additive, or multiplicative. Okay. So we'll click OK. And we'll take the population measure and put it on the color box card, and that'll fill it in for us. So we now have a somewhat of a forecast based on historical data of this data going forward for the defined forecast options for 7 years. Okay, so at the forecast option with predictive analytics, we also have some new functions, predictive functions. 2 in particular. We have a couple minutes here left, so let's see if I can do a quick demonstration. We have the model quantile and the inverse model percentile, right? And so these functions will further leverage the power of Tableau statistical engine. And the model quantile will allow us to analyze number distribution. Now this is, I by no means can do a deep dive into statistical calculations, especially in 2 minutes, but we can take a number distribution by calculating, say, a target value for a selected measure, maybe like CO2 emissions, and see where it falls within a range of values for a selected quartile. So we can define the emissions, the quartile, and then maybe a related or predictive measure, such as maybe GDP. So a country's CO2 emissions factoring in their GDP, and then within, say, a 50% quartile. So it's a function, so it works just like a function. I can set this up real quick. We'll use model quartile. We'll create a say a new worksheet. Okay, so we'll say, I'll just leave it here. Okay, and it would look something like this: CO2 quantile. I can type. Okay, and we can actually define that in a function. Okay, so our quantile or monoquantile, 50th quantile, the CO2 emissions based on, let's say, the GDP. Okay. And we'll drag that to the row shelf. And we'll put the year, and we can kind of see that out there, and maybe even drag in CO2 emissions. Okay, on maybe a dual axis here. So let's do this. Okay, and then put some confidence bands in there, and we have some other statistical options that we could do. But just wanted to point out that we have the quantile, then we have the model percentile, which is the inverse of the quartile, and display the probability percentage, which we can add here for less than or equal to the observed mark, right? So we can actually put different binding on that. Okay, I'm running a little bit over time. I don't see any unresolved questions in there, so I just want to thank you for attending today's session. Please stay tuned. We do have a series planned. We'll be offering more webinars in the near future on other topics, and we will be sending out emails about those soon. If you have any questions for webinar or any questions or requests for webinar topics, please do reach out to myself, Steve Thatcher, Steve at alingconsulting.com, or Adam at alanconsulting.com. Okay, thank you all.